as I was raised by hippies, but as I've gotten older, I kind of have a belief that the arrogance of atheism is just as bad as the arrogance of the religious zealot, and that this whole thing is a massive mystery. And to pretend that it's not is to we're going to hamstring all of these conversations. We're going to put shackles on all of our debate and all of our conversations where we're trying to figure out what's real and what's not real and what's the shared experience that we all have. Like, I don't know how you view the world. And the only way for me to find out how you view the world is for me to ask you and not berate you for your opinions, but try to like get it out of you. Like, but what about this? Challenge you with other perspectives. How does he feel about that? How did you, like, sometimes you can get very quickly to how deep a person's perspective on an issue is with just a couple of questions, because you see what they espouse, what they say, and a lot of times that aligns with very particular ideologies, whether it's right wing or left wing.
Yeah.
And then a couple of questions deep, you start asking about opposing viewpoints and why do people think this way, and do you think that perhaps it's this? Do you think it's perhaps? And then you can get to how much they have actually thought about it. And the moment people become dogmatic, the moment people become ideologically captured by a very specific group of things that you've adopted as your opinions because it aligns with science. We saw that during the pandemic, this trust the science idea. Well, which science? Like, what is science? Science is not a consensus. It's a bunch of different people looking at data and trying to come to and when you know that that's hamstrung and you know that that's captured, that's not science anymore. You know there's propaganda involved. You know there's lies. This is not science. This is a business, and it utilizes science, and you're caught up in an ideological debate about a thing that you should be completely objective about, but you're not, because it's just like all the other things that human beings do. We like to decide that we are correct, and then we defend from that position.
Yeah.
Instead of just looking at these ideas, like, I think one of the things that happened with atheism is that it did become like a philosophy. Remember when they had Atheism Plus? Do you remember that?
No.
Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, it was
I'm
wonderful.
stoned.
So they had atheism, and then they had these like social justice warriors that came out with Atheism Plus.
Oh, I don't
and
know
it was
those.
atheism attached to a whole bunch of ideas about like ways to behave, things that they value.
Yeah. It's like a humanist Bible as well, isn't it?
Exactly. They were basically forming a new religion. It was adorable. It was adorable to see that these patterns of thinking it just seemed to be inherent to human beings.
Yeah.
Like the tribal cultural rituals, tribal cultural philosophies, their myth of the origins of things that they all accept as their own. It's like an identifying factor that cohesively connects groups, which is why, like you said, that you didn't enjoy church because you don't like going to that. I actually like it. I've been to church.
You just told me that the Bible is one of the most boring stories.
It's not boring. I didn't say it was boring.
Oh, is it one of the worst stories?
No. I said people are full of shit, and that story sucks.
Oh, the story sucks.
The story of. I used to do a joke about Noah and the Ark that if you told that. I can't even do the same joke anymore. But if you told it to a 5-year...
Why can't you do the same joke?
Because I used to say retarded.
Oh, okay.
If you told it to I think I said a 5-year-old kid, obviously with mental problems, he's going to find holes in that story. He's going to go, wait a minute, there's two of each animals, but animals eat other animals. And, the punchline was, I'm not that retarded. But this idea that we have about these stories, I think, is that they happen exactly as written. And I think it's way more likely that all these stories are about real events that took place a long time ago and were told in an oral tradition. It's just what really happened is very difficult to say. And when you have the hand of man, when you have human beings, especially in the New Testament, you literally have people deciding what is going to be and not going to be in it. So there's human beings deciding what is going to be in the Bible, which is insane. That's insane as it is. It doesn't mean that the things that are in there aren't representatives of the most recent version of telling a tale that probably did happen.
Well, this is what's dangerous, right? And this is what's not just confused but careless about some of this thinking. When you go, my team thinks this, and I'm just gonna double down on it, even though I've got reasons against this position. I'm still going to be defending the position of my group. So people like conservative commentators like like Ben Shapiro think that like eating non-human animals is morally wrong, but they carry on doing it. I think probably because it's part of like what their team does. When I spoke to Peterson, he conceded that that problem we spoke about a moment ago, the problem of systemic evil in nature, was a massive problem for the God hypothesis. And as we said, he thinks you should just crack on and carry on working on it. But there's a sense in which it's okay if your view isn't affecting anybody, right? You can have a false belief and you're entitled to that freedom of conscience to think something, as long as it's not bringing about and breaching the harm principle. But there's a sense in which, like, it's like take Peterson's view, because we spoke about taking that leap of faith, right? After I had this conversation with him, he tweeted like an hour later. I was arguing that my view is that happiness and pleasure has to correspond to a purposeful life, right? That if your life is meaningful, it also has to involve a flourishing or happiness and pleasure.
Well, I think we see that with people, right? People that don't have a meaningful life and just seek pleasure all the time are miserable because they're missing that part of the equation.
Yeah, that's what he's
meaning.
Yeah, that's essentially his view was like that. He tried to pull them apart, and afterwards he tweeted something like, "What use is happiness when we have mountains to move?" Which is a nice Nietzschean quote, but it's a nice bumper sticker or something, or a fridge magnet. But I don't think we should live our lives by it. I gave him this example. I said, suppose God came down to us and said, here's the meaning of life. Like, create war, spread disease, commit genocide, right? You'd go, that's not the kind of meaning I thought. That's not what I had in mind. Right. I don't want that kind of meaning. But this idea that only meaning and purpose ultimately matter and they don't need to correspond to happiness and pleasure, like that's a recipe for disaster. Like you can't hold that view and tell people that all that matters is their purpose and meaning. You just have to look at the 20th century, right, to see how when people think they know what ought to be done, despite all the pain and suffering they cause, like how that can lead to all kinds of atrocities.
Yeah.
So this idea that we should just carry on, sticking with our thinking beforehand, and this ultimately comes from having the wrong view about things, right? He ultimately comes from taking an unreasonable leap of faith. Like he offers arguments. Let's take Peterson for an example again. Like people are holding him up as the champion of Christianity at the moment. People are writing books saying this person's going to save our faith, which is going extinct. In the US, for example, the Southern Baptists are baptizing people at the same rate as they were in the 1950s, but your population's growing. It's disappearing. In 2001 in the UK, we had 70% of people identifying as Christian. Now it's less than half. And you're about that now in the US. You're just 23 years behind, and it's the same trend. Religion's disappearing, and it needs to evolve philosophically. You need a proper philosophical defense.